it's one of the last of a group that you've been reading for a good 20 years, on and off. This is Dayton Ward's Moments Asunder, the first book of the Coda series. Initially, my takeaway from Moments Asunder and from many other Trek novels is the concept of the parallel realities Trek style. That's my show today. Imagine titles happening right now, and music if you like, and here we go. I have some notes. Here they are. Maybe I can do something with them in the next 15 to 18 minutes. So I just finished the last chapter of this book. We're ready for book 2. Gonna give it some time. Long story short, if you're not familiar with the Trek novels, since 2001, they've been taking they've been doing their own thing, because there hasn't been Trek since 2005, and Enterprise really didn't get in the way of things. So from the end of Voyager on, it really started with the end of Deep Space Nine, the Trek novelists, maybe by accident, but it became its own continuity. We have Picard. Things are changing. What do we do with this? My point of view is that every novel, every work of fiction takes place in some other reality. I've had that idea since I was a kid. It's a fine idea to have. My expertise in understanding parallel realities comes from a lifetime of reading DC Comics, even though they've made a mess of their universe. But if you're excited about the Spider-Man No Way Home movie, Star Trek's doing it too. So I'm going to bring in a lot of those concepts here. Maybe I can go see the movie, but I still don't want to go to the theater. That's another story. So the idea of an alternate reality has always been the idea of a daydreamer. What if I made this choice, if I made this choice? So it's definitely not limited to science fiction. Go read Borges. Borges ready for you. I'll put some links to just Wikipedia, but the Garden of Forking Paths. Now let's talk about Trek. Plenty have talked about this before. Parallels, the Next Gen episode. Now that's a key episode in understanding how folks are grappling with alternative realities in Trek. Before that, we of course had ideas about timelines. We had ideas about different dimensions. That's the mirror universe concept. Okay, so long story short, parallels. Worf jumps quantum realities. So the idea, the concept here is that part 2, what is a quantum reality? The idea and concept here is that quantum realities are separate from parallel realities. In any decision one makes, that can branch off to another quantum reality / timeline. But depending on the decision one makes, if we go back to parallels, there must be one of the early jumps Worf makes is he goes from the he jumps into the chocolate cake universe. So in one jump, the cake is not chocolate, and the second jump, the cake is chocolate. Now, here's the deal with this. The chocolate cake universe doesn't last. It's a branch, but it's a pretty weak one, because we're just talking about chocolate cake. And so the concept behind this is that cannot sustain itself. And it'll either branch off or just disappear. These are concepts that you don't see in a lot of comic books, because we're not dealing with multiple Earths or parallel universes. We're dealing with branching quantum realities. You kind of with me? I like that the cover deals with a little bit of this. We can see the branches here. Get my groundings here. So what I was writing to get the thoughts in my head, the movie takes us up by opening time travel as a means of branching realities that eventually may collapse on themselves. We don't see that evidence yet with Discovery Season 3, but we discussed it a bit. Okay, so it's this collapsing on itself that I'm trying to get at. So the chocolate cake reality, that cannot sustain itself because it was just the chocolate cake. You don't have an entire existence of just the only difference between one reality and the next is chocolate cake, and then everything else happens as it happens. That's not quite. Okay, so that's the, again, I already talked about this. The branches are demonstrated in Endgame. We see a little bit in Loki, not quite developed yet. That's going to come, but that's the Marvel Universe. I'm sticking with Trek, but I'm going to leave this for later. First Contact also establishes a different branching reality from everything up to that point, because as soon as Picard and the Enterprise go see Zephyr Cochrane, that sets events in a different way, and that sets stuff up for Enterprise. But that could explain why we see a different version of Zephyr Cochrane in Metamorphosis and TOS. More on that later. Now, novels. Now I'm jumping around. I'm doing my best to stay organized, but you can see where my mind goes because I get excited about this. This is some good stuff. So I read these Trek novels as a larger discussion about these concepts, and it's a lot of fun. And it begins, at least as far as I could tell, in the post-Nemesis Trek. What really stands out here are the Christopher Bennett novels. The Department of Temporal Investigations. He's done 2 in paper form. I believe he has an ebook out there as well. Watching the Clock. This came out in 2011. And Forgotten History. I'll put a link to Bennett's WordPress page on here. And this is a lot of fun because Bennett deserves a PhD for this book alone, because he's investigating every Trek episode that deals with time travel and how it might all fit in a larger omni narrative. This is a beautiful book to experience. And the same with Forgotten History. I could read these all day long, and kudos to Bennett. Bennett also gets a shout out in Ward's Headlong Flight book, which is the direct prequel to Moments Asunder. I'm going to do a separate review on that, of course. But the great thing about Bennett's book is his acknowledgement pages, which get to any kind of outside source you might want to read about real scientific ideas behind quantum realities. But we're in the fiction, but he's heavily influenced by Asimov's End of Eternity novel that I'm sure you could pick up any old place. I'd recommend that as well. So here's some quotes. One thing that stood out after I read Watching the Clock about the quantum realities is the concept of quantum Darwinism. What we think of as linear history is more of a blur of alternatives that average out into a single timeline. This is key, averaging out into a single timeline. So you could have a divergence in the 24th century. You could have divergence right now, right? But in the larger scope of time, let's say 1,000,000 years, that timeline's going to come back in on itself and become the stream again, or the branch, or whatever metaphor in nature you'd like to use. So you can have these discontinuities, these separate realities that take place, but gradually, you can't see my hands, but gradually it's going to come together in the same thing, because as time goes on, that's just a larger concept. I can kind of see it in my head. Sharing it out loud, I guess I know it can get confusing. I was quick on my typing, so it's or a fuzzy piece of yarn, more than a monofilament, like that too. In other words, these are competing states, and at the end of the day, one of them needs to win out. So that's how quantum realities / timelines play out in Trekverse, at least in the novel form. That's how we can enjoy different Trek stories in comics and in novels. And, media tie-ins aren't going to be considered canon by so many folks, but for us who enjoy seeing these characters interact in different ways, we have to acknowledge that every story could be placed in in a different alternative reality that gradually comes back to the same place. If you want more discussion on continuity, I'd recommend the Star Trek II commentary. It discusses those small continuity tidbits in the larger role they play in fiction. That wasn't in my notes, but there we go. Okay, so Bennett, big shout out to Christopher Bennett when we deal with these alternate timelines and branches of realities. Seeds were planted in Ward's Armageddon Zero, and this is the spoiler that I didn't think I'd do. So if you caught that, it's fine. Spoilers 3, 2, 1. But we have these aliens come out and attempt to I think they're going to collapse the novel first because they have to. And that's where my review of this book itself, which maybe I'll do sometime, comes in. You can see how kind of geeked out I can get about these alternative realities. I can kind of see them. I think it's the branching that's fascinating for me, as just understanding storytelling. Something can take place and not interfere. And of course, this is all fiction anyway, right? It's how we enjoy it. It's how we appreciate it. So it all works out at the end of the day. And these games that folks can play in fiction might one day see them, see it pan out in real science. But for now, this is what we have. The working theory of the multiverse and this post-Nemesis Trek. Time is always fracturing into a series of branching realities, spawning their own realities, with each successive deviation more fragile than their predecessors. And then those divide and crack outward. So this is a weak branch. Now, what makes it so is the existential question that we're left with. I think Ward has Beverly Crusher asking this question. This is this gets into the deep stuff, but all timelines, again, apex or point in which the balance is lost and the entire reality slides into entropy. Not quite what Borges was thinking of, but it's fun to see in science fiction because that's what it's all about. So the larger lesson is you can still enjoy the last 20 years of Trek novels and get to know the characters as they developed in their own particular way, because those novels aren't going anywhere. Because in our reality, we get to enjoy these insights. It's my geek out at its best, I suppose, to understand an entire omniverse of anything that can happen. What makes the Spider-Man movies fun to watch? Both versions, the Spider-Verse and what we're seeing in the 2021 movie. It's what's been going on for years. The joy I take in reading Christopher Bennett's books, just about how the exercise in fitting these pieces together and making it work. And I think that's where the joy comes in. I have yet to see overall an argument to make some of the discontinuities, if we're looking at like Chekhov's age in the 2009 movies versus otherwise, but you gotta let that go. It's not all perfect, but it's fun to try to mash up and put together. Yeah, James Swallow, there he is, right there. So Max Swallow and Ward are putting the finishing touches on the end of 20 years worth of maybe unintended continuity with media tie-in books, which you just don't see. And when I do a review of this separately from what I've been talking about just with my Geek Out, I'll discuss, some of the characters I'm going to miss because they so far, reading book one, there's some fates have been had. Bad things have been happening. So a lot of fun. I recommend it. That's my 2 or 3 cents. I hope you have the same enthusiasm that I do. If you do, please say something nice. Hey, have one of those great days.